A lot of conservation efforts in general are heavily rooted in colonialism. Conservation refugees are a real thing, and they're treated horribly when they try to gain back their rights to hunt and fish. Yeah, I actually did a video on this a couple of years ago, maybe like 4 years ago, about how, I used to be a real big conservationist. I used to call myself an environmentalist, and I kind of shy away from those terms. Back in my youth, I was a big John Muir fan. I believed this false narrative that there is such a thing as pristine wilderness. It is very much a kind of white male colonizer belief. We had all of these like highly educated white men in the 18th and 19th century and early 20th century in the United States who really had this desire to set aside spaces for pristine wilderness. But you see, the whole premise of pristine wilderness is entirely a myth. That's white people coming in and saying, I don't see any other white people, so there must not be humans here. There must not be any people interfacing with nature, living as part of nature, shaping the landscape, because I don't see white settlements. There's this book I read a number of years ago called Tending the Wild by M. Cat Anderson, and they cover this issue pretty extensively. It's all about the ways that Indigenous people in California in particular shaped the landscape in order to increase biodiversity and make sure that they had an abundance of food. There really is no such thing as pristine wilderness in the United States. When we look at landscapes, we again, as white people, come in with this preconceived notion that this is just how it evolved, completely absent of human interaction. So in Tending the Wild, Anderson discusses all of the techniques that Indigenous Californians used, including controlled burns, intentionally removing the tree canopy to increase sunlight, intentionally spreading seeds, all of these techniques that were used to shape the landscape. But we as white folks don't see the hand of human beings because they're not white hands. We don't see the ways that people have shaped the landscape, increased biodiversity, shaped those ecosystems, because it wasn't white people doing that work for generations, for time immemorial. And when folks like John Muir came in and said, actually, we're going to set aside these areas as pristine wilderness where there is no interaction from humans, what we've seen is that biodiversity has decreased. Anderson talks extensively about how removing people from the land, people who had a really profound connection to the land, people who were shaping the land in beneficial ways, when you remove those folks, you see species struggle, you see biodiversity decline, because people are a crucial part of the ecosystem. And so when I had comments yesterday from white vegan activists, white conservationists, who were like, we need to set aside large areas of land that are not touched by humans, saying really eugenicist shit, like we need to reduce the human population down to 10 million. When I see this very white colonialist attitude of human beings are a scourge and it would be great if human beings just died out or we reduce the population significantly. We could get into a whole conversation about how population reduction, the zero population growth movement, or the NPG, negative population growth movement of the 70s and 80s, how all of that is eugenics. The book, The Population Bomb, is a eugenicist book. It's real bad. I hate it when people reference it. That's all a very white mentality of the solution to this is just to remove more people from the planet, is just to come in and we're going to shape the planet the way we want. And we think that if Earth was left well enough alone, that it would heal and things would be better. That's because they're coming in with a white Eurocentric mindset where we think that we have dominion over the planet. We think that the way that human beings interact with the planet is obligatorily harmful, that it is going to decrease biodiversity, that we only have an extractive relationship with the planet. A big part of the reason I'm a permaculture person is because I believe that human beings are part of nature. We are connected to nature and we can have a positive impact, not only on each other, but on the planet, on biodiversity. We can work to heal the damage that has been done by an extractive, Eurocentric, Christian dominion mindset. We can decolonize our relationship to the planet by looking to the Indigenous people who have always known that they are not set apart from nature. It is a very Christocentric way of thinking to believe that you are superior to nature, that humans have an elevated status up here. There's us, there's people, and then there's nature. What we know from indigenous populations in the United States is that when you function in a way that honors the reality that you are part of nature, you are connected to nature, and that you not only have the privilege, but you have the obligation to interact with the landscape, with other living things in a way that has a positive impact, then there is no point in conservation. There is no such thing as pristine wilderness. When you, instead of being like, we should just remove people from the equation, be like, how is it that we can have a net positive impact? How is it that we can honor the fact that we are animals, we have an interface with our environment that can increase biodiversity? We could be a keystone species. We could be like the beaver. We could be like the salmon. We could have a positive impact if we just reoriented ourselves to not falsely position ourselves above nature, but to understand we are part of her. When we have this conservation mindset of like, take people out of the equation, biodiversity decreases in pristine wilderness when we no longer have indigenous people doing controlled burns, when we no longer have human beings shaping the landscape with a focus on abundance, a focus on honoring and respecting and increasing not only the ways that we are able to live in a way that is sustainable, but also focusing on sustainability and abundance for those other species as well, realizing our obligation is not just to feed ourselves, but to care for the entire system, because it's all connected, right? In permaculture, we talk a lot about interdependence, about how when you choose to take an action over here, there's going to be ripple effects that impact other elements of your system, because it's all connected. There are no isolated actions that you take. And we had these white conservationists traveling the country and seeing an area and not seeing, European housing settlements and being like, there's no people here. This is just how God shaped the wilderness, when in reality, those places were shaped by human beings. Taking indigenous people away from their land not only hurt the people, it hurt the land, it hurt biodiversity. Conservationism was a part of causing that hurt, that harm. The issue here really is a white settler colonialist, dominion, manifest destiny way of looking at our relationship with the planet, with the natural world. And if we could shift our worldview and change our worldview to one of regeneration, again, that's a big part of the reason that I'm a permaculture person, because my ethics are earth care, people care, and fair share. If you put those at the forefront instead of extraction and profit in a capitalist system, if you built your society around those three ethics instead of around corporate profit, instead of around extracting resources, extracting wealth, gosh, how different things would be. How different they could be, right? How different they could be. So yeah, I no longer really call myself a conservationist. I definitely don't call myself an environmentalist, because those are spaces that are pretty rife with white supremacy, pretty rife with a lot of eugenicist belief, and definitely still holding on to, although I know a lot of people in those spaces would consider themselves agnostic or atheist, and they're kind of unaware of how they still have a manifest destiny mindset. They still have a relationship to nature that is false, and falsely believes that humans are separate from nature, and that the only impact we can have on nature is deleterious, instead of understanding that we're part of nature and we can have a positive impact, much like indigenous people in this country had before we moved them off of their land, causing wounds, causing harm, not only to those people, but to nature herself. So yeah, thank you for this comment. Really appreciate it. Thanks for giving me a chance to talk about this.